Hi, my name's Steven.
Hi, I'm April.
This is the 3 Pi Squared ABA Business Leaders Podcast, where we discuss topics on how to create and grow an ethical and sustainable ABA practice.
Together, Steven and I owned a 7-figure ABA practice that provided both clinic and in-home services.
3 Pi Squared has helped over 900 ABA practices start up and expand with our comprehensive products and services geared specifically to ABA. Now, let's get to the podcast.
Welcome to ABA Business Leaders Podcast, brought to you by 3 Pi Squared. I'm April.
I'm Steven.
And today we have a guest with us, Allyson Wharam. Nice for you to join us, Allyson.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, today we're going to have an honest conversation and we're going to collaborate, share, and learn from one another because we all share common goals to provide quality services to our learners and to build ethical, sustainable ABA companies. So we're definitely thrilled to welcome someone who embodies these values, Allyson Wharam. Allyson is a BCBA, instructional designer, business owner, doctoral student, and mother of 3. Did I get all of that right?
Yeah, it's a long list.
Busy life.
It is very busy.
You're also the host of In the Field, the ABA podcast, and founder of Sidekick Learning, a platform dedicated to improving supervision and training across our field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am excited to be here. Like you said, I'm Allyson, and I think we have a lot of alignment. I'm excited to talk about training and supervision because I know that is something that you all are focused on as well.
Excellent. Well, one of the things that we like to talk about here is staying grounded in your values and knowing your why. So I would love to hear from you, Allyson. Like, what's your why? Why are you here? What brought you into the field and why are you still here?
Yeah, great questions. Like so many of us, I fell into it, and I won't give you the whole backstory, but I'll actually start where during my journey as a graduate student myself, getting supervised hours. And at that time, I actually was the onboarding trainer for our ABA organization across multiple different sites. So I would do a majority of the live onboarding training, in addition to having a regular caseload and things like that. And then later stepped into the role of training coordinator. So as a fieldwork student, I really had this ideal setting for getting these unrestricted hours, for embodying more of that BCBA type role where you're training other people and things like that. And I still felt incredibly isolated and like I didn't have the guidance and the opportunities that I wanted to have. And so I noticed that even then. And I actually did 2 separate programs at the same time. I did my course sequence in ABA at the same time that I was getting my master's degree in instructional design. And so all of this was kind of swirling around in the back of my head of we're this field, this applied field that treats our coursework and our training entirely separately of the applied part of our training. And why is that? And why do we kind of leave these fieldwork students and then their supervisors really out on their own? And so that planted a seed that grew. And I didn't know that I was going to do anything with that at that time. I just kind of noticed this gap, and how I saw that gap then also impact the people around me, in terms of the clients, the other fieldwork students, being in community with those people. And then once I became certified and was a supervisor for a university practicum program, I also saw that even within that really structured environment, we weren't given the tools and resources as supervisors to really ensure quality across that experience. And so I just kind of had this lingering desire to improve the field. And I love the science of ABA. I love the work that we can do with our learners and the impact that we can create. But we can't make that impact if our practitioners aren't given the tools and skills that they need. And so I really see training and supervision as the vehicle for change within the field. Rather than kind of sitting and waiting for things to happen, it seems to me that those are the places that we can have the biggest impact. And so that's kind of a long-winded kind of journey, but that's kind of where it started, and it just evolved and grew into then more of the practical side of creating some of those tools and resources and seeing how that could impact other people as well. So yeah, it's been a long time that has just been really my why, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. We hear that story a lot, going through school and through school, and then even freshly out of school and freshly certified, or even a few years into being certified, feeling alone and feeling like you could definitely use more support. And I don't want to be judgmental against any programs, but I do feel like in our field as a whole, we could do better at preparing and training, even before we get to, to our BCBA job, right? Because it's not just about the coursework too, because, when we're working towards our hours and we're receiving supervision, what does that supervision look like? We probably all know someone or ourselves who had like inadequate supervision. I know that over the years, when we hire BCBAs for our ABA agency, we heard a lot of stories, a lot of stories about what they wish they would have had, or what they didn't have, or some of the tough things that they had to deal with, in their roles. And on the flip side of that, as I've gotten to know a lot more ABA business leaders in the field and ABA owners, a large number of them want to be able to support their staff and be able to even grow their own BCBAs within their company. But it's, how do I do that? And how can I afford that? What does that look like? Who's in charge of that? There's just so many moving pieces that maybe then they get into that position and they realize, wow, okay, I can see why this is maybe not as good as it should be as a whole, because it's kind of hard to pinpoint what's needed. So you've said that supervision is the heart of our field. So are there, I don't know that there are, because I know it's very vast. It covers a lot of things, but are there any like top 3 or top 5, or, this is the one most important thing you need when you are supervising, or even when you're looking for a supervisor, if you have that like opportunity to seek out your own supervisor? What should you look for on both ends of that? I don't know. It was kind of an awkward question. Okay, good. I'm glad that it resonated.
Yeah, it's a great question, but it's a very large question. Yes. So I'll try to kind of hit the big pieces of it. But yeah, I would say on the supervisor side, some big things to think about are moving beyond what is right in front of you. So it's easy. What I see a lot is that supervisors may be supervising an RBT who's over for like case consultation. And so they get very caught up in, for better or for worse, what that client needs, because they're seeing supervision in that way, which is great, but that's a different function from developing the skills and the repertoires of that future clinician. They go hand in hand, but one thing to think about is to not be so centered on that client and their programming that you lose sight of the skills that trainee needs, that student analyst. So zooming out and saying, okay, like what are your goals for your career? Also, not just right here and now, because supervision is a service to our field that carries on outside of that relationship, whether they stay with your company or not. The impacts of that person and who they go on to supervise, that impacts all of us. And so it is an investment in in the bigger picture of our field, essentially. And so really thinking about that person, their goals, and their skills as a whole, rather than just what opportunities are presented. And there was an article recently, I think it was by Liddon et al., that looked at unrestricted hours opportunities. And that's the big buzzword that everyone dreads, getting these unrestricted hours, which are the things that are more similar to what a BCBA does, which is hard to create those opportunities for maybe technician level staff because they may not be billable. But then what happens is you are kind of stuck with just providing opportunities that are billable, and then maybe those people aren't developing the skills that they need, which then goes on and creates a gap later when they are certified. So I would say priority number one is really thinking about that student analyst in front of you and how what you're working on goes on to create the skills that they're going to have later on. And thinking about those unrestricted hours, not as activities, but as competencies and things that person is going to need moving forward. So instead of getting caught up in like, what is the little activity or task they can do right now, really thinking about what skills do they need and working backwards from that, similar to what we do with our learners. But with that being said, that's a really big job for someone to do when they also are doing case consultation, case supervision, and all of the other many, many things that a BCBA does. And so to the extent that they can, it's really great that ABA organizations, I think, are paying more attention to this and creating that infrastructure, resource banks, curricula, or finding things that are already created out there to structure this so that someone is not holding this whole experience in their hands, because that's a huge responsibility. And so I would say that's the first things that comes to mind on the supervisor side. There's a lot more, but that's kind of the biggest thing that I think about. On the trainee side, it's kind of the flip side of that, look for an experience that is invested in you and your future growth and your goals, and a supervisor that is willing to be open to feedback. And I guess on the supervisor side, being open to receiving that feedback, but looking for a supervisor who will craft that experience with you.
Absolutely. So I just want to recap some of what you said, because you said so many important things in such a short amount of time. So for that, and I also want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly. So for the supervisor, really zooming out and not just focusing on maybe the particular child in front of you, but also just this general skill sets that the BCBA student needs. And then I love this, what you said, unrestricted hours, looking at them as competencies and not just activities, right? Because sometimes it's busy work, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, what can we have you do that's not going to cost a lot of money, or what's like, okay, what can we fit into this category? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it does it. It's like, it almost becomes like wasted opportunity. And then for the trainee, looking for someone who's invested in your goals and open to feedback and crafting that experience. And I love what you said about like the excuse me. I love what you said about the onus is on the supervisee, advocating for yourself. And that's not only an amazing job, amazing skill to have, going into the position of a BCBA, but we talk about that even on tech level. Every member of the staff, every individual being able to learn, it's a skill of how to have that self-awareness and know what you need and what your expectations are, how to communicate those expectations clearly, and then how to follow through with that. I mean, advocating for yourself is a really big deal that includes a lot of skills within that it's not typical that any of us are explicitly taught that. So I do think that's super important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, you're right. That is a pretty complex repertoire where you have to have the skills of even being able to know where your gaps are, know where you're going, self-assess against that, knowing what questions to even ask of your supervisor and things like that. Yeah. So, but those are all skills as well at the technician level, at the student analyst level. And ideally, those are things that the supervisor is helping to reinforce and create opportunities for if that's not an existing skill repertoire. And I say this a lot on, on our, I feel like I say it on like every episode of our podcast. But those learning to learn skills are really the most important to me when I think about that, because you can't teach every single discrete skill within a supervised experience and within 2,000 hours. That's not enough to last you an entire career. And we're always learning and growing. So the most important thing that I can teach you is really those skills so that you can then carry that learning outside of that experience as well.
Absolutely. That's one of the big things that motivated us to start the growth paths within we had an RBT checklist, and it grew. It's grown. It's like growing into this like really amazing resource. But part of that is growth paths that exist of individualized skills that aren't just to the task list, right? Mm-hmm. And so, there may be part of it that's like your life source. So you're like, what do you need to even like get and keep your job? And of course, all the task list items. But then those soft skills, because even like what you're talking about, even being able to say that with the correct tone or the correct wording to be able to, not that it's about getting what you want, but still, like there's a certain way of communicating that shows like respect and kindness, and you're more likely to have that open back and forth communication. And it's with your colleagues, with your peers, with your supervisor, with your supervisee, with your admin staff, with the parents of the individuals, or even with the individuals that you're working with, right? It goes so far. So it's not even about, it's so connected with the big picture. It's not like, oh, why would I waste time? Because I've heard this attitude before. It's like, oh, I can see that's important, but I don't have time for that. I don't have time to put that into training. I need to train on manding, or I need to train on this specific behavior plan, or I need to train on this, very specific thing right now because this is what I need. And what you're saying is if you train to the right things, then that gives them that ability to apply that more openly to other things as well. And we all know how behavior works. We all know how to teach things. Yeah. But I do think that we get stuck sometimes in just looking at these, okay, especially those of you, and I understand that there are people listening to this podcast who don't provide early intervention services to kids with, a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. Like I get that. It is beyond that. But there is a large portion of our community that's what they do. And so it's like, it's really easy to kind of get that tunnel vision and really focus on it. And this is how we're doing it. And this is our focus. And it's hard to switch gears to understanding, or even to be motivated to provide that training that feels like it's not as important, or feels like it's not that direct. You know what I mean? It's like, so I'll do that later, or we'll do that when we have time. But let's face it, we don't have time later. If we're not going to make time for it now, the likelihood of us making time for it later is not really there. And so then we look at the turnover rate, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. How do you feel about that? With turnover rate, we hear, I'm not feeling supported. I'm not getting adequate training. I'm not treated with respect. I'm not, I just feel alone.
Feel like a warm body. Like
billing. I'm just a $ billing hours. And this is not just techs feeling this way. These are BCBAs as well, right? Feeling this way.
I just want to say one thing. I'll throw it back to you, but that's one of my concerns. Like we see this on the owner side, right? Not knowing what they don't know, right? I don't know what I don't know, right? And understanding that's a thing, but not really understanding how to move forward. So not even knowing what questions to ask. So like for a newer BCBA that may be didn't get the supervision that you or any of us would have liked, and now they are supervising. Like, how do you do that self-assessment so you can say, oh, wow, I've got a bunch of gaps here and I really need to figure this out before I, pass this on to the next generation of BCBAs?
Yeah, I think part of it is knowing where you're going, which is why I really love what you're talking about, the skill paths of and this is kind of similar to what we've done with our supervision curriculum and in some things that we've done as well with, RBT training and whatnot. If you don't know where you're going, you don't have anything to self-assess against, but you also don't know what you don't know. And so what I love about that is that creates clarity for supervisors to know where their students, technicians, student analysts are going, but it also creates clarity for those people to start to see the skills that they need and then self-assess against that, and that's then where the self-advocacy comes in. But you don't know what you don't know. And, I remember feeling kind of lost even as I was having these opportunities of, is this everything I need to know? I didn't have a benchmark really to compare that against to even self-advocate. So I think part of it is just making, in an ideal world, we have a good sense of what that looks like, or something like a path like you're talking about that lays those out. But the other thing I will say about that is that also for supervisors, if you don't feel like you have the capacity to provide fieldwork supervision, if you feel like you're still learning, that's it. Back to self-advocacy again. If that's not within your scope of competence, getting consulting supervision, you technically only need to do that per requirements for your first year, but there's nothing wrong with receiving that ongoing supervision and mentorship. And really, if you're working within your scope of competence, that's what you should be doing. And so part of being a supervisor is evaluating your capacity and being able to say whether or not you actually are or should be in that role. And if not, seeking out additional learning and mentorship.
Do you feel, I asked this question of another guest, I don't even remember who it was anymore, but do you, what I feel in this field is that there are a lot of really amazing BCBAs that want to do the right thing, but they don't feel like they can ask for that. They can't advocate.
So you we were like completely, we were both ready to jump on this same thing, because that is really something, as I feel like where we've got feedback that we're really building an open a community with people who feel comfortable collaborating and connecting and sharing. But that mentality, I do see it a lot as far as not feeling safe to ask questions.
I
and not just
know that.
Not just on Facebook either. Correct. Not just Correct. Social media. But in real life, in person. Yes. And feeling I should already know this. And I don't know where that disconnect comes in, because our field, we're in a learning field, right? There are so many skills that a human being could learn. No one's ever going to learn everything. Never, ever. No. There's, we have such capacity to be able to learn so many things. But it doesn't feel...
Even if it's just from a different perspective, right?
Right. I don't know. Yeah. Do you see that?
I do. And as you were talking, it kind of made me think as well about the privilege that comes with self-advocating and feeling comfortable to self-advocate in terms of maybe your financial security, if you're the sole breadwinner, if you have a learning history, or, power dynamics at play because of all of that. And so just acknowledging that privilege as well of feeling safe to self-advocate. But there was an interesting article that came out recently as well by Brown, Randall, Smith, and Rios. And it's about supervision for early career BCBAs, so post-certification. And the majority actually said that they thought that, a 1 year post supervision period would be really beneficial for new BCBAs. So once you're actually certified, and what they found also was that actually helped with those professionals feeling like they had to operate outside of their scope of competence, because they had this external source to kind of maybe validate that and maybe a safer relationship. The article does a nice job of talking about that and some of the things around it. But I think that's something to think about too, is we kind of treat the BCBA credential as like, that is the milestone. Once you're certified, you're ready to do all of the things. And if anyone really thinks about it, I think all of us can acknowledge that that is the entry level requirement. And so we can't and shouldn't expect that every brand new BCBA would take on, the job responsibilities of someone with 5 years experience. It's just not realistic. But I think that's then where we also have the contingencies of being a very new field and who is available on the staff. There's so many layers from a systems level perspective that come into play, from that very micro to macro level of how that impacts everything. But yeah, I just think we do have to think about that BCBA credential a little bit differently, that it is really the entry level and not just licensed to go and practice everything within the scope of behavior analysis. We see it with clients as well, like being asked to do things or work with clients that you maybe haven't had training on. And so, it's a tricky subject for sure. I'm glad that you brought that up.
It is. I mean, that's one of the things that we're also growing within these growth paths, or like different levels of BCBAs. And one thing, Stephen, I haven't had a conversation like this yet, but I know Stephen's talked numerous times about having conversation with someone maybe in a clinical director role, where they're maybe just a year or two in and they're in a clinical director role. Or, even when we were at the CP ABA conference, there was a lot of conversation, multiple conversations or multiple things mentioned about not all BCBAs even want to be a supervisor, right? Mm-hmm. Or they even see within themselves that that's not the capacity they have, and they want direct services with the learner, and like they're not really in it to, but a lot of times they kind of have to, right? And so I guess that brings me to what did you say the most research said that the average experience for a BCBA? 3 years. Yeah. So yeah, it's like looking at it from a business owner perspective too, right? We're like, everyone's looking for BCBAs, and you just hit on this too, Allyson. It's like, it's new, it's hard, it's growing so fast, and it's so hard to, yes, turnover is there, but it's also hard to hire. And BCBAs are like, you could probably find a job. You could easily get a job anywhere you wanted. But should you? Should you take certain jobs? And then also, if you are a BCBA and you go to a job and you say, okay, well, I'm newly certified. I see that you're looking for a clinical director, and that whole advocating, right? I'm not there yet. I'm going to need, I need to get a good foundation myself first. But is there an opportunity within your company for me to still work with you, but not at that capacity?
Yeah, I think that's something, and this is something that I assumed as well. Very similar to, I assumed that every supervisor, because that's what they're called. They're not called BCBA. They're called a supervisor. Of course, they're going to supervise, right? So that was a big assumption that I made. And then the other one was, I'm hiring a BCBA. They're going to be a BCBA. They already know everything that they need to know. And so I coach a lot of business owners. You're not going to get a mini version of you, right? You have 15 years of experience. Maybe you had education background before this. Mm-hmm. A lot of these newer BCBAs, they're coming right out of school. Maybe they babysat a little bit, right? But they don't have the ability. You're going to have to teach them, right? And so a lot of BCBA business owners will go, wow, I didn't realize how much work is involved in supervising my supervisors. And so I think that's just something that we all have to realize, that, like you said, if you don't allow them to learn what they need to in these unrestricted hours, it's going to hurt everybody, right? And so we all want this field to succeed. And if we're only focused on this one kid at this one time, which again is very important, but if that's all we're focusing on and not looking at the high level outcome that we want, it's not going to be a good result.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think kind of to your point, is you pay for it at some point. Either you invest that time and energy and effort in that initial supervision, and not that you're done after that either. But if you don't invest that time and energy there, then you will definitely have to invest it later on. And so I think that's something to think about. Is it is often time and resource and intensive to train a new behavior analyst. It absolutely is. But it's just more of a question of where you invest that time, because you will end up spending that time and the money and those hours training at some point. And it's much, I like to think it's much safer to fail when you're in that supervision relationship, when you're a student analyst, than when you're also trying to learn all of the intricacies of actually performing the job role of a BCBA. Because even in supervision, there is the degree to which you're learning the skills, but also, are you learning it in the context in which you're going to have to perform it? Like, are you able to do it as fluently and with as many things on your plate as you will when you're a BCBA? And so there is a degree of it's actually harder to train those skills later on, because they are balancing so many other things and so many other things that they're having to learn.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wonder, so I honestly don't know. I'm kind of shifting gears here. I don't exactly know what an instructional designer is. I have an idea, but I would love to hear more about that piece of what you do and what that means. And then also maybe shifting the conversation a bit to training of non-clinical staff within your company.
Yeah, great question. So instructional, it's a little bit loaded in terms of how we think about that term, because as behavior analysts, we're also all instructional designers inherently. We're designing instruction for our students or for our clients or for our student analysts. We're designing instruction. That's a big piece of what a lot of us do. But there is also an entire field of instructional design with its own journals, with its own job descriptions. But it's kind of like the term behavior analyst or ABA, which is actually more regulated than thinking about instructional design, where you can have two different instructional designers with very different skill sets. Like, you could have an instructional designer who is really more just focused on like learning management system administration, or you could have an instructional designer who has a really vast background knowledge on like curriculum design and, those intricacies that go into that. And so it is a little bit of a nuanced word, but when I think about instructional design, particularly as it relates to behavior analysis, I just think about it as really any time that we're designing a performance-based kind of learning experience for someone where we have identified a gap and we want to close that gap. So a big piece of instructional design is actually situated within OBM or performance management, where we first have to determine if it actually is a skill gap in the first place. Mm-hmm. Ironically, that's kind of the first piece is, do we design instruction at all? And then from there, we're using a lot of very similar skills to what you would use as a behavior analyst, where you are looking at what the goal is, designing backwards from that. But I will say also, I think people can feel like if you've been to a training, you know how to design a training. And that there is actually a lot more that goes into designing really sound, solid instruction than meets the eye. And so you have to be really, really actually intentional about, if you have a goal, how you're breaking that goal down, using that backwards design, how you're kind of sequencing those skills and things like that. I actually I think Matt will be editing this podcast, so I'll shout him out. I did a training on instructional design, just a primer for him for his behaviorist book club for Streamline. And afterwards, he made a comment of like, this felt really great because it felt like drinking out of a stream instead of a fire hose. And so that's what ideally good instruction does, is break down the content so you're able to digest it rather than just feeling like you have content being thrown at you. And it really should be designed around, how do I get you from here to here? So I know that was a really long answer because there's a lot of nuance to it. But it is its own field, but it also has the same roots. A lot of the roots of instructional design are the same roots as behavior analysis. And so we might use different terms within that kind of separate field, but we're often meaning the same things. And we also have a lot of common kind of founders or seminal kind of works as well.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much for explaining that.
Yeah.
I assumed, right? But that's one thing I try not to do is assume. Yeah. And so I thought this must be very similar. So that's really exciting. So did you, and we'll get to the second part of the question here in a second, but did you, is that just your interest? Is that what you really like about ABA? And so you thought, I'm going to dive into more of that instructional design piece and learn more about that and get my master's in that alongside of ABA?
Yeah, I knew as I was evaluating master's programs, I didn't feel like there was a huge difference between the master's versus the course sequence. There were a couple of different courses. And so I definitely took the harder route in retrospect, because I did both at the same time. But I knew I wanted to use my ABA skills in sort of a different way. And I wanted something bigger I could kind of tie into that. I needed those behavior analytics skills, but I wanted other avenues to use and execute them. And the part of ABA that I've always loved is the teaching piece, and programming and breaking down those skills and things like that. And so it just made a lot of sense. And now I'm much more passionate. I'm still equally passionate about programming for learners, but I spend a lot of my time and energy on training other adult learners now.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah. So the other part of the question was looking at training our non-clinical staff.
Can I pause you for 1 second on that? So I just want to go over one more thing. Is the advocacy part of this?
Okay.
Just because it's so important that the children that we work with typically, they can advocate for themselves. And if the tech and the BCBA do not feel as though they can advocate for themselves, how does the child then get that space? And so I'm just wondering, because we did that whole, say this all the time, we did this whole series on I hate my job. And that was just one of the things. I'm just a warm body. They don't want to hear from me. I have no support. So if someone is in that space, they do not feel that they can ask for that. They feel like they should already know this. And maybe no one's saying that, but everybody's saying that. What is that first step to start that process, in your opinion, where they can just say, no, this is the line. I can't cross this. This is how I have to start. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, it's tricky. I want to acknowledge the privilege again of where you're able to draw some of those boundaries. But I think it goes back to, you opened with asking about values and really being clear on what your values are and why you're doing this job and what you're looking for, what is your purpose? And through that, I think you can start to develop a better sense of the actions and the behaviors that move you towards or away from that, and where that line might be for some things. But I'm glad that you brought, the client piece into that, because if we're not creating a space for self-advocacy within those dyads for supervisor and trainee or technician or, what have you, then how does that trickle into the general learning environment, and vice versa? If we're not using Ascent with our clients, what does that then reflect to that technician or student analyst as well? But I think it starts top down within the organization of even the very highest level leaders, whether they're supervising or not, being open to feedback, soliciting that feedback, creating a culture where it's safe to disagree. I know that's one of the first things that you kind of said was it is okay to have productive discussions and disagree about things. But I do think part of that too is being able to know how to approach those conversations and understanding that, everyone has kind of their own perspective. And so even if you are self-advocating, is there actually a good reason potentially that it is structured this way within the organization? Could you ask about that first before just saying, well, I think it should be this way? Can you start with curiosity and try to understand why things are the way that they are, and then just coming with this, some of those solutions and things like that. And I think what's also tricky is when you're in this position, it's easy maybe to identify problems, but you may not feel like you have the agency to develop solutions. And it is often much more productive to actually come and advocate with ideas and things like that, rather than just saying, well, this is a problem, and then leaving that problem solving to that supervisor or that business owner, what have you. It's much easier to start that discussion from that place. So yeah, those are some places I would think about.
Yes. Curiosity is so important. We talk about that all the time, right? Just approaching it with curiosity. I love that. Just asking questions. Now, we say that not everyone accepts questions,
yes.
even if it is coming at a very curious, really genuine place.
Yes. And genuine curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. Genuine. And sometimes you're going to approach someone with that genuine curiosity, and you're going to have ideas to share, but they might not be there to listen, right? And so knowing, okay, well, if this isn't available to me, right. Being able to also get curious with yourself and say, okay, what am I willing to do? What are my next steps here? Versus it's easy to get stuck, right? And yes, I acknowledge also privilege, right? We're all in different parts of our life. We all have different circumstances, and sometimes we may not have that ability, that privilege to be able to say, okay, well, I'm not being heard here, so I'm leaving. Though at some point, it may come to that, right? And we talk about how, okay, so coming into a job, coming into being a business owner, you should know your exit strategy. But also, I really think that we should kind of be able to look ahead at any job, even if we're not the decision maker within the company, and kind of know, okay, here are my values, here are my boundaries. What would a plan B be if I find that this job isn't quite right for me? Even, we've had in our career, like in our time of having a company, we had techs and BCBAs come to us eventually and say, you know what? This isn't for me. The field, like the doing this, the day in, day out with the kids and the snotty noses and I'm worn out, and this isn't where I want to put my energy. And so I'm going to go look into like maybe some OBM stuff, or maybe I'm going to switch gears completely and find something else to do. And that's, I'm sad to see them go, but I'm excited for them that they're know what they want, and they're asking for that. They're taking action on that.
Yeah. Well, that made me think of, Stephen had mentioned a couple of times about the technicians feeling like they're warm bodies. And I think, or BCBA is feeling like they're putting all this effort forward and they're not seeing results from that. And I think what that comes down to is, if you don't have, and it's not just skills, there is the systems level perspective of, do you have the resources to do your job? Are you being required to do competing things? There's the whole performance analysis piece.
Absolutely.
But a piece of performance management is looking at the consequences. And are you actually getting reinforcement from doing these things? And so if you don't have the skills to help your learners make progress, then you're not going to be contacting that reinforcement. That is why so many of us are here, which is actually seeing that progress and helping someone improve their quality of life. And so I think that's what it comes down to, in big part, or those feedback loops from your supervisor for when it is tricky because maybe progress is stalled, but you're still getting that feedback that, you are doing the right things, you're doing, a good job. And so how we think about that and how we're actually contacting reinforcement, and as business owners, thinking about that ratio of setting it up so that the effort isn't always outweighing the reinforcement. And not that you can control for all of those variables, but you have to think about that. I think of how can we make this environment and make sure that people have the skills to contact that reinforcement, and thinking about their values as well, because that can be a source of reinforcement is their values.
Yes. So much yes. I feel like I've said yes a lot during the podcast today, because it's really nice to be able to, it's nice to have these conversations, and because I know that people are listening to our conversations, and I hope to validate people too who may feel like they need some validation, and then also to help, supply some potential ways forward, potential, ways to do things differently to help, just to help you out on this journey. But I do want to circle back to that question that we dropped earlier. And I know we're coming in on close to our hour, but I feel like we have enough time to adequately chat about this. Is training for our non-clinical staff. And so as your company grows, well, a lot of people, I don't know. I'm saying a lot because I have no idea the stats on this, but from our experience,
it's like a high percentage.
There's a high percentage of BCBAs who start their own company and they say, okay, I'm ready. I want to do this. Whether they're like, I really am ready. I want to make this next step. I want to have autonomy and I want to be able to do things that are super aligned with how I want to do things and my values, or I'm really getting burnt out. I haven't really found quite the right job that fits me yet. So I get to start my own company. And, various, I don't think it matters so much how many years you've been in the field as far as this situation that I see happen, right? It happens to those who, so it's not even about not having enough experience in the field as being a BCBA. It's more about that business sense that is necessary when you're starting a business that you don't always have. And overgeneralizing here, like most BCBAs didn't go to school to start a business. Most BCBAs went to school to do all the behavior analyst things and teach and help children. And, we've heard all the list a mile long of all the things all the reasons why people became a BCBA, and very, very few to none are, because I want to build a successful business. Right. We've had some BCBAs who also got their master's in business, and that's great, right? Anyway, so my point here is, when you start out, you're the only person most of the time. It's you're wearing all the hats, you're doing all the things, you're working all the hours, you're clinical, you're learning how to bill insurance, you're learning how to hire somebody to do that. You're, credentialing, all the things you have to do when you start a business, LLC or PLLC or what, like all of these things, and they take a lot of time. But through that come those day-to-day businessy tasks that are just part of running a business. And at some point you realize, I can't do it all. It's time for me to delegate. However, I'm having a really hard time delegating because I don't have time to train these people, or I've trained a couple of people to come in and help me with the business part of things, and it failed miserably. So I'm just going to have to do this forever. And it seems like, and I'm just very curious about this belief that ABA is so different from any other field. It's just impossible for me to train anyone to help me to delegate, because I can't explain to anyone what I do because it's so different and it's so new. And I smile when I hear that, because I used to say that too.
Yeah. But I still say that.
And yes, there are a lot of nuances or a lot of things when it boils down to it. But when it comes to being able to delegate, we have to know what it is that we even do. We have to know how we do it. And we have to be able to communicate that. We have to be able to break it down. What's the goal? Like you said, work backwards from that. What are the steps to do it? Sometimes it's a simple task analysis. Sometimes there's more involved. And then we have to train the individual on this process that we've come up with. And also, check in with them and offer them reinforcement and feedback and all of the things that it takes to build a behavior. And I'm really honestly, I'm kind of have like a playful tone, but I'm really not trying to make fun or belittle anyone, because like I said, I was here too in that like mindset and I was stuck. But what I'm getting at here is within like instructional design, within ABA, that's what we know. We especially for our children, for the learners that we work with, is being able to, okay, where do we want to get? What's the behavior? What's the goal? How do we break that down? How do we work towards that? How do we teach it? And how do we, help them to maintain the skill and become fluent at the skill and generalize the skill and all of the things. But we have a really hard time doing it with our non-clinical staff. I don't know. Let's break that down.
Yeah. Well, and I would actually argue, we've been talking about supervision a lot, and I would argue that it's actually not exclusive to non-clinical staff, that it's actually more of a problem of adult learners versus our clients and how we generalize that.
I love that. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because I do think like sometimes the skills that we have kind of go out the window and we don't generalize. And then even if we are doing it maybe within supervision, maybe we don't generalize then to admin staff. But I wonder if from experience as a business owner, part of what gets in the way, because it's still supporting ABA businesses. And so there's still all the nuances of how do I explain this really intricate niche sort of industry to someone? But I know for myself, a big part of it is, well, it's going to take me longer to train this person than just to do it myself. And so you get stuck in this loop, but then you never get out of the loop because you're just doing the tasks all the time. And so, but I would say one thing to think about is that the training doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be this long, huge, well thought out, on-demand course for something that you need someone to do. It can be as simple as I'm a huge fan of Loom. And which, is just like basically a screen recorder. And so I will just pull that up and talk aloud through doing a task. And then one thing that you can do is actually send that to the person and then have them create the task analysis or standard operating procedure, and then use that to check for the gaps. And so I use that as an example just of something that doesn't have to be this kind of big, unwieldy thing, that it can be what we would call also just-in-time learning. And then you have those standard operating procedures for the next person. So a big piece of it is really just getting yourself out of that. And a part of it, I know for myself, this isn't going to sound very behavior analytic, but the mindset of like, but what if they mess up, and being kind of worried about things not being perfect, because this is your business and you're very close to it. And so that for me has been a big piece of it as well, is letting go of some of that control and being okay with things not being perfect as someone is learning, because that is part of learning. But do you guys have any strategies that you found really helpful for admin staff?
I could say ditto. Like the same. Like my good friend, when she was 3, she would say same every time she saw things that were the same. And so totally, because as you were saying this, I'm over here like emphatically nodding my head. And Stephen said that for a while. He's like, Teams. Just go onto Zoom or Teams or whatever you already.
It's a transcribing thing now. So you record your screen, you record, and then you just say it out loud like you're thinking it in your head. I click this, and then I click that, and then I do this, and this is why I do this, and this is what happens once that happens, and then you got to check on this. Yeah.
And we use that strategy, and it also helps to know if the person who's receiving it like is actually like how they interpret it, what steps they come up with. And then it also helps you to see, I don't even know what today is anymore. Last week, even the two of us, we had a divide and conquer, and Stephen had to go to an appointment, and I needed to do the podcast. And so you kind of like, you pulled it up, you walked me through like the technical part, and I jotted on my page. I was like, yeah, I got this. He's like, you got it. I got it. We didn't do the next step of like, okay, now it's my turn to walk through it. Okay. So then we get to the podcast where it's time to do it. And somewhere on my list of things, I never wrote the words press record, right? And so, and I don't know, maybe he said it and maybe I assumed I would remember that, or maybe he assumed I would know to press record. Yep. But that step wasn't on there. And so I forgot to press record. Now, 20 minutes in, I realized, and, we all had a good laugh. And then so we had a panel on, we went back and we, pressed record. But even like little things like that, I mean, it's like going back and forth. Okay. Walking through the steps, writing down the steps, doing the steps. Do you have any questions? Observing the steps. It's just this it doesn't have to be perfect.
I love new RBTs for this very thing, right?
Break my system.
That's my I hope you break it, kind of. Hopefully it's not terrible, but hopefully you can see the holes, because all of the assumptions that I've laid out, that I know everybody knows this. When a new person comes in, you get to see where those assumptions are, right? Obviously, you would hit record, right? We were both thinking that at the time, but it's not so straightforward when you're rushed and you're like, oh man, I got to get this all done. And I've got the mute, and then everything's great, right? So there's just, when things are actually going on, this is where we can see where the system breaks. And then we build a more robust system, right?
Yeah. And I think that's part of creating that kind of safer culture as well. I had this literally happen this morning, that my assistant is creating some of the demo organization. So I had done just this, sent him the loom. He had walked through it. He had done it. And then we realized this morning, because someone reached out to ask, like, hey, I don't think I have access to the courses, that I forgot to mention the most important piece, which was actually enrolling them in the things that they were demoing. Should be super obvious, but in that, I did say, hey, just a note, we need to make sure we do this, but that's my fault because I left this off. And so part of creating that culture of safety as a leader is being able to admit when you've made mistakes, instead of just saying, well, hey, you've done these other kind of similar pieces, you should have thought about that. That's not on him. It's on me for not being more clear. And so modeling some of that throughout the process as well can make it safer to receive that feedback as well.
Absolutely. Allyson, is there anything that we didn't cover today that you were really hoping to cover in our time together?
No, this was great. I really enjoyed kind of talking through all of this. It is a really huge, nuanced topic that I think starts at that really big system all the way down. And so it was kind of fun to talk through some of the levels of that with you.
Excellent. So tell us we'll tell our listeners where they can find your podcast.
Yeah. So my podcast is called In the Field, the ABA podcast. And April and Stephen are going to come on, I think, later this month, which I'm excited about. Yeah. And so we talk a lot about a variety of things, but a lot about training and supervision within the field. So you can find that on any podcast player. Our website, if you're interested, is www.sidekicklearning.net. And then not super active, but sort of active on LinkedIn and Instagram. My handle is Supervision Sidekick. So happy to connect with anyone in any of those places.
Oh, I love that. I'm so excited. I'm definitely going to be referring you out, and I would love to have more conversations about adult learning. I wrote adult learning with a big exclamation point at the top of my page, because I think that was like the biggest takeaway out of this whole conversation was, okay, yeah, maybe it's not about clinical versus non-clinical, or it's just adult learning, right? Yeah. Okay, we can program for a 3-year-old, but what does that look like in a grown-up? Yeah. So, yeah.
Can you just share a little bit about what Sidekick Learning is, if you don't mind?
Sure, yeah. So we started out offering a supervision curriculum for fieldwork just out of that need to kind of create that structure. And so we still offer that, but we have basically a learning platform now that is used by organizations that has just a variety of different training options, specifically the fieldwork supervision curriculum, but we also offer RBT training and things like that as well. We're working on the 8-hour supervision course right now. That's our goal for the summer. And so just really trying to help support some of that quality training and streamline things, as you guys are really well aware of some of those gaps, and help to close those as well, just helping from that systems perspective.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right. Well, We appreciate all of you listeners out there. We're so excited that you spent, and we know you're busy, so we're excited that you spent your time with us today. And yeah, do we want to, anything else that we have, any closing?
No, just help your BCBAs and your RBTs advocate for questions. Yeah.
And that starts by modeling it, modeling too, modeling, showing your mistakes
absolutely.
And asking questions and getting curious. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Hopefully it was helpful. If you would like to gain access to this entire video and actually our entire library of videos, please join our ABA Business Leaders membership. You can find that at www.3pisquare.com.